Welcome to a new video. Today in the altcoin video we are going to talk about how you should be entering and stepping into an altcoin. There are some general guidelines that I would like to provide you before you are actually entering into them, and it might feel a little bit difficult to do so because there's so much hype, there's so much sentiment, and when something starts to rally up there's only bullish hype happening until the switch takes place. And you need to be aware of the fact that once there is such a hype, you probably are one of the last buyers. So when do you get into one of those assets? That's what we're discussing today. We're also going to focus on Ether, which is getting more momentum. We don't see it that much yet, but I do see it on the charts. And you do see that the ecosystem surrounding Ethereum is waking up. And then I'm talking about the DeFi section. Uniswap had some news which started to break out. So SushiSwap did the exact same. But also we see corrections taking place in the Ether ecosystem with Arbitrum and Optimism. So those are all going to be discussed. Before we continue, also make sure to follow me on other social media channels. And if you do like me making this content, if you want me to see some good guests where we're going to talk about crypto, where we're going to talk about macroeconomics, if you would like to see me making more content, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because by sharing the content that I'm doing, it gives me more abilities to actually grow this YouTube channel towards what I would like to make it, which is one of the most educating channels that provides information and me giving you information to get yourself into a financial stable future. That's what we want to do. And in order to do so, I would like to share some thoughts on the consultancy and education that we have. If you go towards the link that is in the description beneath, and if you are into the crypto markets, or if you're not, but if you're in the crypto markets and you want to make the best you can out of this bull cycle, but you don't know how, if you don't have an actual plan on executing everything right in the markets, it might mean that you lose momentum, that your emotions are going to take the best of you and are going to be actually taking the trades that you don't want to be taking. That's when we can help you. We can help you get to your financial goals. It's all your own journey, but we can assist you with the guidelines that we have, with the portfolios that we have, with the structure, with the strategy that we have. We can assist you, and that's where the consultancy comes in. You can see the returns that we have been making in the previous approximately 6 months, between 71 to 87%. It's tremendous, but overall, we are getting very positive feedback from people that are saying, the returns are great, but more I feel comfortable by entering these markets because the emotions and the noise are erased. If you want to know more, you can click on information on Crypto Consultancy and reach out towards us if you have some questions. Now today, of course, we're going to talk about the altcoin markets. First, before we continue, we're going to talk about all the important charts that I have here. First of all, the total market cap chart, which is currently consolidating, is probably getting into the stage where we are into a period of sideways action. I think that we are on the edge of having the final push, so I think that ultimately we're going to take the liquidity here, which is pretty much where Bitcoin is at this point. And once we take this liquidity, that's probably going to be causing a reversal pattern, which is going to lead to a correction of approximately 20 to 40% across the markets. Some people suggest that we're going to have a correction comparable to this. I do not believe so. I think ultimately this run was way heavier than we were suspecting to see pre-halving, that far away from the halving as the halving is here. Usually around the halving and after the halving, you don't really see 50% corrections. As a matter of fact, anything between 20 to 40% correction on Bitcoin is a no-brainer technically, where you should be getting interested into a trade overall. Now, what we see here is the total market cap, which is projecting ourselves into this range again. So the thing that you should be remembering is that between January 2022 and April 2022, we had pretty much the only bounce in the bear market, all right? So we bounced from 1.5 to 2.2 trillion, and we found ourselves into resistance here. Currently, the total market cap is basically into a playing field of nothing, which means that you can still have more upside here, but once we get into this region, it's very likely that we're going to top out really soon. So that means overall, we still have approximately 20% of upside on the total market cap. We did have almost 70% already. So we're getting to the end stage of this entire run before we're going to get a market-wide correction. But in this 20% run, it's probably not going to be Bitcoin, but it's going to be the other ecosystems, including Ethereum. And that's what we're going to talk about, because in the total 2 chart, you can see it's lagging behind heavily. The total market cap is here, Bitcoin is here, Ether is somewhere in the middle, and the altcoins are just somewhere here. That ultimately ends up by this chart, which is total 2, the crypto market cap excluding Bitcoin, which as a result is providing a chart where it's currently facing the resistance that Bitcoin was facing at 30k. So Bitcoin was facing this resistance at 30k. The altcoins are just following suit, as Bitcoin is always the first one to move. Now we get towards the stage here that we are also entering this range, so there is still a lot of upside to gain, which in this case is approximately 400 billion, which ultimately ends up by a potential peak. If you put 400 billion up top of this, you get into this region, assuming that Bitcoin is going to have a slight correction. So the total 2 gives us an additional confirmation that once we get here, that's probably a period where the total market cap for altcoins is going to have a very rough correction, but also the entire markets are going to have a correction in which the altcoins are probably going to get a correction of maybe even cut by half. Now, Ether is currently lagging behind, but the total market cap overall, the total 2, is lagging behind even more. When we look at the total 3, you can see it's even further away from the levels that the total 2 and total are. So if you suggest that we're going to get here, it's 285 billion. That is most likely going to come from the total 3 market cap and not from Bitcoin. I think that this period where Bitcoin is going to consolidate, it might push like 3 to 4% more. And when it pushes 3 to 4% more, I'll just show you, it is going to be approximately 3% from the 1 trillion mark, which is just not too much. So the final stage of this run isn't necessarily going to happen with Bitcoin, and I discussed this yesterday, but it's probably going to lead that it's going to come from Ether, which is going to have the Denkun upgrade and which is also going to have the momentum with the spot ETF. Hence why I suspect that everything in the Ether ecosystem is going to follow suit. That's also what we can see from the charts here. Total market cap is currently consolidating and ready to find itself into resistance, but probably that's going to cause momentum from the total 2 and total 3 charts instead of Bitcoin. It doesn't mean though that we're going to have a correction of 20% on altcoins. They happen quite regularly. If you're looking at Ether at this point, Ether is in the middle of this park too, so there's still a lot of momentum to gain from this one, which is approximately 25 to 35%. I think we're going to see 3.8. But in between, you can have corrections which are in the trend. So here we've seen a correction of 20% on ETH. Oh, I've even seen corrections of around 10% solely. But if you talk about market-wide corrections, you see a 30% correction here on Ether. And we also saw these heavy corrections of 40% on Ether. So there is a certain ballpark to look at. Now, before I continue in how to step into an altcoin, the first thing you need to consider is the fact that currently Ether is up against Bitcoin for this month by 7%, but also the past 2 weeks. So the past week we saw that Bitcoin is correcting and Ether against Bitcoin is up by 4%, 4 to 5%, which means that money starts to rotate towards Ether. It's not an ultimate confirmation, but there is a rotation taking place which is happening from Bitcoin to Ether, which, as a matter of fact, is providing an argument that the next move up after the consolidation of Bitcoin has finished is going to cause or going to happen through Ether instead of Bitcoin alone. So perhaps from this point, buying altcoins is the best sense still, but you need to be aware of the right altcoins to pick. And if you have been following my Twitter, you know that I've posted a long read in which I suggested that alt seasons are probably a wrong metric to look at. But at least if you're talking about an Ether alt season, it is probably the time to start looking for those positions in the coming periods, because Ether is picking up momentum. And the sentiment isn't just not there yet, but the sentiment will come because of the fact that sentiment always follows price. All right. So in this period for Ether, the sentiment started to become worse and worse and worse. And that is after the price started to do a very bad manner or started to have a downtrend, because Bitcoin had an upwards trend. And that's why the sentiment continued to overshoot in the narrative of Ether being absolutely dog shit. And when some people are so terribly negative about a certain asset, you should realize that you should be getting yourself positioned into something. And that brings me to the question that we're going to discuss today in this video, which is how to step into an altcoin in a cycle. It is a very difficult question, especially for someone that is basically not as advanced as someone that has been experiencing a few cycles. But if you even had one cycle, it still is a tremendously difficult question to answer, because you've got hype, you've got sentiment, you've got price action and stuff. The thing is, if there is a lot of hype surrounding a certain asset, in this case Inch has it, Solana has it, probably Render has it too. If you see something like this and you see the upwards momentum, you probably are going to see that there are a lot of influencers talking about these assets because they have the highest hype. The reason they talk about it is because it generates the highest engagement. It's probably the easiest to talk about. They might have a position themselves or anything related to it. They might have a marketing deal with the project. That is all fine. However, if you see the hype bursting out, which has been happening with Solana, has been happening with Injective, it usually means a few important things. First of all, you're probably not the first buyer. And it's not bad to be the first buyer, or not to be the first buyer, but it's terribly bad to be in the last group of the ones buying into the markets, because then you are the buyer of the one posting something on social media, because they use you as exit liquidity. The second thing is that probably because of the hype and the sentiment, it starts to overshoot in actual valuation. Markets are always pricing in the actual value at that point in time, I'm aware, but it can be overvalued and undervalued. For instance, if you go back towards Ether against Bitcoin, and I discussed this earlier as well, the merge took place in September 2022. The bear market started to happen, but Ether actually surged back up and didn't really follow through with the rest of the market. So there was some actual momentum to the merge. But the merge itself had a long-term high expectation, but not a short-term one. But now, based on the fact that short-term nothing really happened to the valuation of Ether or to the ecosystem, short-term effects are getting priced in more than the long-term effects, hence why Ethereum becomes undervalued, and that's why the sentiment starts to take over. Same with Bitcoin ETF at this point. The ETF is super bullish, but people are putting too much value into the inflow of the ETF. It will correct. We don't know when it will, and you need to use those corrections, and you shouldn't be jumping into an asset that is just going up only. That just 2021 is something different than this cycle. So it's not going to happen. Same with Ether. because something happened like the merge, and the merge has been taking place and it had a tremendously positive impact for Ethereum long term, not short term. Because of the negative short term impact, you can see that right now the upgrades on Ether and the spot ETH ETF are getting undervalued because people suspect that it will be bad again. And that's how you create sell the rumor by the news impacts. So reverting back towards the point of altcoins that have been going bazooka, and you've had this meme coin here, which is Bonk. You can see that if something starts to overshoot, the hype starts to pick up even more. And you can see that during those peaks, you will have massive corrections. You will have periods where the markets are just heavily overvaluing. So the more you see the hype, the more you should be conservative, and the more you should realize that the markets are probably going to get an impact on the downside, or probably going to correct back to actually get back towards reality. Let's phrase it that way. The other way around, if something continues to fall and fundamentally something strong is still taking place, in the case of Ether, make sure that you get interested into the actual asset. And something interesting as well, and I'm using Bonk for this actual scenario. Almost 90% of the buyers, in terms of amount of buyers, so not amount of volume, but the amount of people buying the actual asset. And usually they are tiny buyers, okay? 90%, 80 to 90% do it in the last 10% of the price move in terms of time. So most of the buyers into Bitcoin in 2021 did that during either November or May, when Bitcoin was between 50k to 70k, period. Same is the case with almost every asset, because the hype is going through the roof, which means that most people jump into that asset based on that hype. So if you cut off doing that, you are already beating 90% of the traders, which is a metric that you should understand. So how can you actually make sure that you step into the markets if you do it the right way? There are a few important factors for this. And again, I can do a Bonk with this. I can do basically any altcoin. But if something has been going up like Bonk, make sure that you use this metric. If an altcoin is having an upwards trend like this, I'll be buying when it drops 25% from its high until 60%. That's just the narrative. And of course, it's a little bit flexible. So for instance, for Bitcoin and Ether, you can say, okay, 15 to 50%, because usually in a bull market, it's not going to go lower. For Chainlink, you could say 20 to 55%. It's just a standard ballpark. The reasoning is, and I'll try to explain, because if you go towards Bonk, and I'll use a few more examples. If you go to Bonk, it has seen a 48% correction. It has seen a 43% correction. It has seen a 35% correction. And it has seen, and I'm not even calculating the in-day corrections. It has seen a 38% correction, and then the big one took place of 70%. If you use this narrative, then I'll try to explain the fact about risk. So for instance, if you like to buy this asset and it is around this price, but you only can see the actual green candle taking place. So you can see this run and you decide you want to buy here. You need to make a calculations of the risks that there are in the potential of that actual asset. It has not seen a correction. So the odds of having a correction based on the fact that the people buying here are probably going to take over the selling pressure, and likely because of so many green candles, it is also very significant to see that we probably are going to have a lack of buyers. It means that there is a certain risk that price might fall to here, and there is a certain reward that price goes here. But because you only see the green candles, there's perhaps a 70% that this happens and 30% that this happens. That ultimately means that this is a minus expected value, minus EV move. Now, if something is in an uptrend and has been seeing this peak, and you decide that after 25% correction, I'm going to buy, it means that the upside is relatively less risky, because there are already sellers out of the markets, and the downside is getting limited too, because probably because of the correction taking place, more people are getting interested in that asset after the correction as there is still an uptrend. So if you decide to buy from 25% down from the peak, the chances that it goes here and the chances that it corrects, you can already see the difference in the upside and the downside, which is a plus EV move. But this is probably going to get more limited, and this is getting more positive. So that's why making an educated decision of buying something that is rather just correcting and having a correction of 25%, or you're going to chase the pump and are looking for sellers to dump on your buys. So no matter how far the altcoin has been rallying, if it has been doing anything between 25 to 60, for Bitcoin ETH 15 to 45%, for Link 20 to 55%, if that happens and it is taking place, start buying from that number. Just use it as a general rule. I'll show you a few examples. Solana, for instance, has been seeing this massive move, and of course you are missing some, but in this case it worked out the right way. So you have been buying here, the chances are it drops here, the chances are that it runs here, it's pretty much equal, so it's a minus EV move. Now in between you can see that in this peak we had a correction of 25%, so you would probably be barely into this one. In this case we had another correction taking place of 17%, so probably that's not the biggest issue. But I know that the hype started to increase massively here, and you can see that there is a correction of 37%, which means that if you were buying at 25%, you would have been up significantly, and if you would have be using the DCA strategy, your average would have been around $87, and you would be fine by your current position. Another example is Chainlink, which has been seeing a tremendous run. First part you would have missed, probably you would have been positioned already in this period, but during this uptrend you can see that we had a correction of 22%, we had a correction of another 21%, we had a correction of another 31%, and that's the big one you should be taking position into. And there's another one taking place that is currently approximately 15%. So if we get into the ballpark of $16.50, that's when you can start getting into the positions. And then you can see that your downwards risk is so much lower than when you start chasing those pumps. All right. Same goes for Arbitrum. Final example of today. Has seen a tremendous run, but here the upwards trend happened. 22% correction, another 18% correction, another 15% correction, and then the party ones, a 25% correction, immediately bouncing up by approximately 60%, and we had a correction here which was 36%, and here we have a correction taking place of 20%. That's it. Just you write it down. Just say Bitcoin ETH 15 to X%, Link, big altcoins, smaller altcoins, I'll just take 25 to 60% and use that. And if you don't have the actual trade, you wait. You avoid the emotions, you avoid chasing the actual trade, you use the narrative to buy the dips. And if you need more assistance from our side to making sure that you're doing the right in the markets, timing it, choosing the altcoins, and building your portfolio, make sure that you send an email towards us. I hope you have been enjoying this update. It's me trying to spread or give you guidance in this entire market and this journey. Next week I'll be back. Hopefully I'll be back with my altcoin video if I've hit 700k. Make sure to check me out next week again. Ciao, ciao.